Namaskar, good evening. Thanks for joining us. Today we have the honor of hosting five very esteemed panelists from diverse fields to share their views on the evolving Indo-US and Indo-Russia relations. Please allow me to briefly introduce Mr. Ashok Sarjanhar, who served as India's ambassador to Sweden, Latvia, and Kazakhstan, and he's currently the president of Indian Institute of Global Studies. We have Major General P.C. Kharbanda, who is a veteran of 1971 Indo-Pak War. He's a senior fellow at CLAWS, Center for Land Warfare Studies. Then we have Emily Tamkin, who's a well-known American journalist and the US editor of New Statesman. We have Brigadier Pradeep Sharma, who has over 35 years of active military experience. He's a well-known speaker on contemporary topics of national security and counterterrorism. We have Commander Dr. Shishir Upadhyay, who's Associate Professor and Associate Dean at Jindal School of International Affairs. He's a former Defense Intelligence Officer with vast experience in Indian Navy. He's the author of India's Maritime Strategy, Balancing Regional Ambitions and China. Welcome all of you. Thanks a lot for joining our panel. We look forward to hearing your views and insights.
Thank you.
Let's start with the topic of Quad. Last year, the annual India-Russia summit was cancelled for the first time in 20 years. The official reason for cancelling was the pandemic, but no one actually believes that, as meetings with other countries have been going on virtually. Many analysts believe that the real reason was Russia's displeasure at India's recent active involvement in the Quad, a loose military alliance, or you could just call an informal forum for cooperation between India, US, Japan, and Australia, ostensibly to contain China. My opening question is, are we slowly losing Russia? And I would like to invite Ambassador Sarjanhar to answer that.
Thank you, Yajur. Thank you for the invitation to participate in this forum. I'm delighted to be here. To respond briefly and directly to your question, are we losing Russia? My answer is no. I think our relations are very strong, dynamic, vigorous, and I could give you several examples. Of course, you've given the example of the summit being postponed. I'll not say cancelled, because we had the visit of our foreign secretary to Moscow in February. We had Lavrov coming here last month, and they were basically discussing when the summit can take place. The Prime Minister had a conversation with President Putin very recently, and you would have seen, and this came just after his conversation with President Joe Biden, and he came out with a tweet and he said that I'm delighted to have had this conversation with my good friend, President Vladimir Putin. You would see that Russia was one of the first countries, if not absolutely the first country, to offer help and support to India to deal with the second wave of COVID. So I would say that our relations are strong, our relations are vibrant. We are nowhere losing Russia. Yajur.
So you brought up the recent visit by Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, who visited Delhi and then met with his counterpart, obviously Subramaniam Jaishankar, but did not meet with the Prime Minister, and who was apparently busy with the Bengal elections. And then after that, Mr. Lavrov then just jetted off straight to Islamabad, where he met the Pakistani Prime Minister, Army Chief, and the Foreign Minister. So Michael Kugelman, who's an Indo-Pakistan expert at the Washington-based think tank Wilson Center, he has stated that PM Modi not meeting with Lavrov certainly comes across as a snub. Do you think Mr. Modi snubbed Lavrov because of Lavrov's decision to visit Pakistan on the same trip?
Well, there used to be a phrase which was called hyphenation, India-Pakistan hyphenation. That used to be particularly prevalent as far as the West is concerned. Whenever a Western leader used to come to India, they thought it necessary to also travel to Pakistan. But that hyphenation was stopped in 2000, March 2000, when Bill Clinton came to India. He came to India for 5 days. He visited 5 cities. On his way back, he stopped only at the Pakistan airport for 2 hours, and he addressed the people of Pakistan from there. So I think this hyphenation has gone out of the window forever. We don't look upon it as a hyphenation. I think the nature, the strength, the depth of our relations with Russia is much greater than what Pakistan can ever hope to aspire for. So I don't think that, I think it was some scheduling, to respond to your first comment that Prime Minister Modi did not meet him. It was some scheduling issues that the Prime Minister was not in town, so he could not meet. This is not the first time that something of this nature has happened. And of course, India does not equate itself with Pakistan, that if Mr. Lavrov is going to Pakistan, that we would feel an affront, or we would feel that he is doing something that he should not be doing. Yes.
There's not much concern from a diplomatic standpoint. While we're on this topic, I'd just like to bring in the defense angle as well. So relationship between Russia and Pakistan has been warming up pretty much since 2016. They've been doing joint military exercises, and now Russia is even supplying Pakistan with Mi-35 attack helicopters, anti-tank systems, air defense weapons. How does this impact India from a security standpoint, given that 86% of armaments used by India are still of Russian origin? And on this, I would like to get the view of General Kharbanda and Brigadier Pradeep Sharma.
Thank you, Yajur. I'm really honored to be here addressing this webinar. It's a pleasure to take part in this. Now that the contours of the Indo-Russian relationship are changing, similarly, the contours of the Pakistan-Russian relationship is changing. Like you said, 86% of our war-fighting equipment. To that, I'll add, in the last 5 years, Russia has provided 49% of our defense imports. It's a very sizable amount. And for a long time, in the foreseeable future, we are going to be dependent on them. However, there is a shift. We are diversifying. The Russian-Indian relationship, like Mr. Sajanar said, is time-tested, etc., solid, but in the changed global dynamics, no relationships are permanent. Our relationships are strong. Like he said, there's no snub to Mr. Lavrov. It's a normal thing which happened. But the increase in the joint exercises and Pakistan getting militarily closer, getting attack helicopters. Listen, the Russians want money. Exports mean they're big ticket export items. If we are diversifying and we only gave 46% as compared to 90% earlier, we've had other partners giving us warlike equipment. So while we will continue, that they're giving the Pakistanis, so be it. We are prepared. There's no issue.
Okay. General Brigadier, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, it's, Yajur, firstly, thank you very much for having me on your show and on this interesting debate. It shapes opinions and it shapes minds, which is what I'm looking at. So it's wonderful to be here. Now, my take is a little different. We've relied on the Soviet Union and subsequently Russia for a long time. Now we seem to be gravitating and quietly sort of shifting towards the US and the Western world, including France and Israel. A country has to do what it has to do in its own interest. And India today finds itself in a peculiar and I would say a very sensitive and delicate, advantageous position where we can get the best from both sides. Both need India in their own interests. So it's diplomacy and it's politics with a deep thought and a vision, which is going to land us in good stead. So now, how far we can carry both of them in a balance is anyone's guess at the moment. And perhaps once this COVID situation, is behind us, we'll get a true picture. But nevertheless, we can expect Russia, with Turkey, Iran, China, Pakistan, to show interest in Pakistan too, because that's where then they leverage, our relationship against the US. Similarly, a little bit of bubble here and there to express their resentment on issues like Quad are bound to happen. So no journey in international politics and international relations is free of hiccups. It all depends on how smoothly we can circumvent these hiccups and move ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. So speaking of Quad, can I get your opinion on this, Mr. Upadhyay? How serious is the Chinese threat in the Indo-Pacific, and do we really need the Quad?
Okay. We've seen the rise of Chinese economic, political, and maritime influence in the region over the last decade. In 2009 is when the PLA Navy, for the first time, entered into the Indian Ocean region on anti-piracy patrols. And since then, they made some very quick gains. And by 2017 is when they had established a naval base at Djibouti. And 2017 is also the time when Doklam happened along the LAC. So for a long time, India had a huge geostrategic advantage because of the Andaman Nicobar Islands and, our location in the Indian Ocean region overlooking the Chinese slocks, all the trade routes past south of India. But I think ever since the PLA Navy has set up a base in Djibouti, I think a lot of that influence which we had is kind of diluted. And therefore, for us, plus we've seen, the growth of the Sino-Pak nexus, which is very alarming. Also, the BRI, which will connect through the CPEC, the Chinese-Pakistan Economic Corridor, logistics connectivity from Gwadar leading right up to China. So these are very dangerous developments for India. And for us, the threat of a two-front conflict is very real. And that is something, which India alone, I don't believe can balance. And we really need the Quad in order to counter those threats. Plus Quad again, brings us, Quad is basically a grouping of all the 4 major democracies in the Indo-Pacific region. And what we're trying to do is basically defend the extent, the global order, a rules-based global order. And we see for the first time, a rising superpower like China, which is challenging that. And there is no counter unless these 4 democracies stand up together, there's nobody to counter China in this region. And so in that sense, the Quad is extremely important.
Do you want to bring in your take as well on that? Emily, do you want to add to that?
Me? Yes, I do. First of all, thank you for having me. It is great and very humbling to be here. I think, first of all, I think we should be clear on what the Quad is not. The Quad is not another NATO. The Quad is not the sort of alliance in which the United States demands the kind of fealty that we have with our allies. And I think that's important, right? I think the ask that's being made of India here and to acknowledge that it's not the UK, right? It's not Germany, that's important, that this is a strategic partnership in which people will have disagreements and, but which can nevertheless serve as kind of a structure to counter this threat from China. The other thing that I wanted to just stress as we talk about this is that the framing for this conversation is, does India moving closer to the US threaten the Indian relationship with Russia? And I would agree with everyone who said that while it might change the contours of the relationship itself will endure. But I'd just like to note that the flip side of this is, does Russia moving as close as it is to China, is Russia threatening its own relationship with India, right? Because that's the way I see it, that's kind of the other side of this coin. I was in Delhi in 2019, 2020, reporting on the India-Russia relationship. And as an American, it's kind of it's strange to wrap one's head around this idea that this is your great friend, this is your strategic partner, your longtime pal, and yet they're this close to China with whom you have all of these other disputes. And I understand that the Indian positioning is different, right? And that there isn't the same kind of you're with us or you're against us, and so India can work, so Russia can work with China and still be friends with India. But the reverse of that is that you need to have parity, and that means that Russia needs to understand that India can work with the United States and still maintain this relationship with Russia.
Thank you. So it's interesting you brought up the point about like United States doesn't expect the same kind of fealty as they would probably expect from their NATO partners.
Mm-hmm.
And interestingly, the other two are already US allies, they're former US allies. But that's basically the view that's been voiced by Russia. I would like to, so I think recently, a very senior Russian officer, he stated that India is currently an object of Western countries' anti-China games, and the West is attempting to undermine India's close partnership and privileged relations with Russia. The Chinese share pretty much the same view. As someone who lived in Hong Kong for 3 years, I've been reading Global Times. I know the Chinese perspective is India is nothing just a pawn in US hands, or it's turning into one. So my question to everyone is like, what is your take? Especially Emily, you, since you're seeing from an outside, is that a widely held perception even in the West that now India is slowly becoming a Western stooge?
I just really want to stress that that is not at all the perception here in Washington. I can understand why Russia and China think that, and it's, that's their right, that's their prerogative to see it that way. But I actually think that it's been hard for people in Washington certain policymakers in Washington to understand that India is never going to be just another partner. It's not going to be another ally. It's going to have a degree of foreign policy sovereignty and independence that, just speaking very plainly, most American partners and allies don't have. And I think that that's appreciated in Washington. And we'll see with the S-400, if India does not get the sanctions waivers for the S-400, we can revisit this conversation. But the fact that they're likely that they're expected to get those waivers, I think, speaks to the fact that the United States is not trying to dictate to India what it can and cannot do. And I think actually, two things. First of all, I think we would not be having this conversation about the closeness, this close defense and security relationship between India and the United States without China. So the Chinese view can take that into account as well. And secondly, I just think that to me, it's remarkable how far people in Washington, which does not do well very often with nuanced foreign policy positionings, have actually come to appreciate that India has this kind of privileged standing, that we have this shared interest, that interest is China, and that we need to respect India's unique foreign policy positioning to work together.
Thank you. Yes, please. I think so. After
okay, Pradeep, yours.
After General Pramanda, we'll go to Brigadier Sharma.
Yeah, let Pradeep, yours.
Okay, all of you. I think everyone has a take on this, so I'll let you go. Please go ahead.
All right. Yajur, if I can go ahead.
Yes, please.
International relations are not based on, how should I say, history or on morals and, principles and things like that. They're actually driven by national interest. And therefore, it's going to be a challenge for India. While I don't disagree with any of the panelists, I tend to agree with them most. But it's going to be a challenge for India to actually sift through the facts and indications and then head towards whatever is a better option in our national interest. For example, if Russia is close to China, can we leverage that closeness to bring in peace with China and settle issues along the boundary? Would a confrontation with China, where by teaming up with the Americans, would that serve us better? Or would it ultimately be used only as a leverage to resolve various issues in our subcontinent and along our borders? Now, at the moment, I think the Biden administration is too new. They are making announcements. They are trying to look at their own laws. ITAR is one. Their defense exports is another one. We recently had a hiccup in the supply of vaccine-making, substances. So there will be hiccups. We have to let this administration settle in. And we have to also play the Russians to leverage and to arm twist China. And where possible, Pakistan. We have to look at things which are towards, which are for our, advantage and benefit. So going by semantics and going by indications of a press statement alone is not the way to read into international relations, because behind the press statement and behind various visible acts, there is a lot of track-through diplomacy which goes on. So I think I would leave it at that. Let the others take on from where I've left off.
Okay, General Karbanda, you want to go ahead?
Thank you, Yaju. Now, Emily, we need to understand, why are Russia and China getting together? Unfortunately, the United States is the driver. In that, consequent to the trade war and so on and so forth, China-US relations dropped. Strategic competition, whatever. On the other hand, you also had pressure, sanctions being put on Russia. Thereafter, the second lot, which came in the month of end March, early April, has driven the Russians even closer into the Chinese arms. Now, is that there is a need for us to understand which is the bigger evil between the old administration and the fresh. It appears that the US can come to a working relationship with China, but Russia, being the most powerful country who can actually do damage militarily to the US, is a bigger threat. So this is what is driving them together. There is a need. Now, India has a very good equation of strategic relationship with the US. It's on very good terms with Russia. India has the capability of trying to get a common meeting ground or improve relationships, at least between Russia and the US.
Ambassador Sajjanar wanted to say something, so please.
Yes, I did. Thank you very much, Yajur. And, there's a very interesting conversation. I'll like to make 2 or 3 very quick points. Number one, Yajur, what you said about, India being drawn by the West into the Quad, into the sphere of influence of America. It was actually said by Lavrov himself when he was addressing a major think tank in Moscow. And this, of course, immediately invited a rebuttal from the Indian Ministry of External Affairs, which said that our relations with any one country are independent of the relations with other countries. And you would recall that after Lavrov's visit, when Dr. Jaishankar was addressing a particular conference, he said that no country can dictate how India should run its foreign policy and with whom we will have relations or will not have relations. So I think as far as that is concerned, it has been quite clear. Second point is, I fully agree with what General Kharbanda has said. Actually, Russia has been thrown into the embrace of China by the Americans and by the West. Whether it is after Crimea, it is after Ukraine, now more recently, earlier it was also 2016 elections, intervention there. Now it is a cybersecurity attack. It is also Alexei Navalny. You look at the report, the declaration of the G7 that has come out, meaning there is a whole litany of items, complaints that the United States has against Russia. So I was actually hopeful when Mr. Trump had come that he wanted to improve relations with Russia, but he was not allowed to by the Congress. And now with Mr. Biden there and Democrats having their own issues with Russia, I don't see any hope of betterment of relations. But that is a pity because the United States has identified China as the major competitor or major threat. And like Nixon had gone to China in 1971, so that two countries could get together against the third. So here, I think the United States definitely needs to get together with Russia if we have to counter China. The last point I would say is that Russia has emerged as a junior partner of China. And what I can see, at the moment, they have no choice. That is why even Lavrov was using the same terminology that Quad has emerged as an Asian NATO, which same terminology which China uses, which Global Times uses. So I think either willingly or otherwise, they have no other option but to toe the China line. But my own assessment is that long-term convergence between Russia and China is a huge question mark, because there are going to be areas, whether it is Central Asia, whether it is East Europe, where there is going to be a contestation between these two states. So it is in the interest of India, and hence also in United States, that India and Russia have good relations and have strong relations. We can take this last point forward if you want, going ahead. But I feel that if all the countries want to counter China, it is India-Russia strong relations are in that context very useful and necessary. Last point on the Quad, let us not look at the Quad only from the point of view of maritime security and countering China. You would have seen the last ministerial meeting, also the last Quad summit on 12th March. There are a whole lot of items, whether it is infrastructure, sustainable development, it is vaccine production, it is emergent technologies. There are sustainable infrastructure, transparency in infrastructure. So there are a whole lot of issues that the Quad is going to get engaged in. And let us not just reduce it only to maritime security and countering China. Sorry, I've taken a little longer than I intended to, but this is...
So a lot of you rightly believe that India needs to have its own independent foreign policy, and it is, and what relationship India has with one country are independent of what relationships it has with another country. Rightly so. But what if the other countries don't have that view? We lived during the Cold War. India had tried to pursue a non-aligned strategy, but for whatever reasons, it ended up in the Soviet camp. Whether it ever acknowledged it officially or not, that's a different matter. But that's how the whole world saw it. Now, a lot of analysts believe that India-US-Russia relations are going back, in fact, getting worse than they were during the Cold War. Let's say we enter into another global atmosphere where on the one side you have the West, and on the other side you have Russia and China. India may want to remain independent and have relationships with both, but what if they don't leave that room for strategic autonomy? The kind of strong comments we see from people like Lavrov on the Russian side, and if you look at what the outgoing US ambassador said earlier this year, that India will sooner or later have to make choices. It wants to keep its options open, but that may not be possible. And I think Emily just said it surprises her when they start appreciating India's needs to have its own relationship priorities. So yes, we may want to do that, but what if we are pushed to making a choice? And I wanted to get your views. We'll start with you, Emily, because you wanted to make a point, and then we'll come to you, Dr. Upadhyay.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're sort of seeing the world that you just outlined, right? It's not like, oh, what if one day we're back in the Cold War? I mean, we're there by any other name right now. US-Russia relations are bad, and we can, to the general's point, I mean, we can go, as Americans and Russians often do, back and forward over who started that, and was it Libya, or was it Crimea, or was it 2016, or was it NATO, and so on and so forth. But the reality is that relations are not good. And I think when one looks at US-China relations today, we are also seeing this kind of Cold War thinking, and not just from the United States. I think that there's a lot of hostility toward the two right now, and India is doing it, right? So even in this extremely difficult situation that we have, India is nevertheless managing to work with the Quad and still hosting Lavrov and still apparently deepening defense ties. I think that actually a greater challenge, or a great challenge for the India-Russia relationship is broadening it out beyond defense, right, and into business ties and people-to-people ties, which has less to do with the United States. So I appreciate that it's in a difficult decision, and I appreciate that the U.S. and Russia do not always take the same nuanced view of foreign policy that India does. But I guess what I'm trying to say is that you're talking about in the future, if there's another Cold War, what will we do? And I guess what I'm saying is that future is here, right? And we're seeing what India is doing, which is continuing to work with both the United States and Russia in different ways, right? It's been 50 years since 1971. So it's only natural that it would be, that the permutations would look different.
But at the end of the day, our arms, like we talked about earlier, either we source them from Russia and then they're not compatible with the US. So it's pretty clear to the US that we will not be becoming a big importer of arms from them. Or we change the direction to the US, which would be basically breaking off with Russia. So at least from a defense side, there might be we might need to make a choice. Sorry, I'll get Dr. Upadhyay on that one.
Yes. So, okay, when talk about non-alignment, I think what happened was in the beginning, the term non-alignment was kind of misunderstood by the Americans. For the Americans, it meant, if you're not with us, you're against us. Whereas non-alignment actually didn't mean that. It didn't mean that India would deliberately follow a policy which would be opposite to that of either of the powers. And of course, indeed, it is true that we did lean on the Soviets during the Cold War and during the 71 conflict. But I think all that has changed now. And today, the foreign minister says that we follow a policy of multi-alignment or issue-based alignment, which means India will align with different powers based on different issues, which is not very different from non-alignment, because what it means is we'll follow independent foreign policy. And I think over the years, America has also learned its lessons on how to deal with India. And they realize, as Emily rightly pointed out, that India is unlike any of the allies that they've been used to dealing with, like Japan, Australia, New Zealand. And therefore, India is a country with whom they can do business. And there are multiple factors there as well, the Indian diaspora and so many other things that we have going on with America. And therefore, in the long term, they realize that, India is a country with whom they can have a strategic partnership, which we really have now. At the same time, I think, I believe we are now in a post-unipolar world, moving towards a multipolar world. Some may believe that we are already in a multipolar world, and India is one of the poles there. And I think that's how the world order is going to be structured. These great powers, the different poles are going to be aligned with each other on various issues. And there might be alignment on certain issues like climate change or pandemics and things like that. But there will be other issues on which different powers may, be against each other. So I think that is a reality that we'll have to deal with in the new world order.
Thank you, sir. There's an audience question that I'd like to ask. There are a few questions which are sort of more or less on the same lines. There's one which is saying to Russia, is China a better strategic partner to Russia than India? Another one asks, even if India's weak economy currently suddenly surges forward, the truth is Sino-Russian links are far better than those with between India and Russia. We already know there's not much of trade besides defense imports. So how realist is India about its relationship with Russia? As in, I think what the person is asking is like China offers far better value to Russia than India. So can we really rely on Russia going forward? Yes, sir, Ms. Jennifer.
Thank you, Yajur. Like Ambassador Sajanhar said, the Russia-China combine is a very artificial combine. Russia is as wary of, today it has no choice. It is a junior partner. Like he said, they are towing the Chinese line. Yeah, I mean, they have no choice. China is a market for them. China, they can export to them their gas, etc., which Europe is trying to turn off the tap, close the tap, they send it here today. But in the long term, please understand, China, if it gets big and becomes a superpower, the Russians have more to lose. They are talking of Vladivostok, yeah, in the Greater China map. I mean, it's a very complicated relationship, and India, the Russians are more in convergence with India over a long term. I'm not talking of short-term ones with the pandemic and the US are putting pressure. Everything will get worked out. There's likely to be a US-Russian summit next month. I mean, this is, while you're talking hypothetically at the moment, but we need to understand that Russia-China equation or this bonhomie is very temporary. Russia is never going to let China be the big brother. They're too proud for that. They're too big for that. They're too powerful for that.
Yeah, and they're not used to being junior partners. But at the same time, people say the same thing about US, India as well, that India is just a convenient tool for the US to contain China. But at the end of the day, they have so many disagreements, whether it's on trade, climate policy, a lot of it, human rights. So there is not much convergence between US and India besides the aim to contain China. And what if the US and China reach a different kind of agreement where they don't really need to contain China anymore? Can we rely on the US, which is more transactional in its nature, than more of somebody who's kind of like you can trust over a long time? But as Ambassador Sajanhar wanted to make a point, so I'll bring him on this first. So you're on mute.
You have raised a number of issues, and also General Kharbanda, and I fully agree with what General Kharbanda said, because at the moment, Russians don't have a choice. So, they are forced to, and the credit for all this goes to the West and to the United States in particular. But I don't see the US policy with respect to Russia changing in any significant way, because and I don't think Mr. Biden will want to do it, because the Democrats are firmly against. Emily, you could comment on that. You are there, you know it much better. You see it day in and day out. And also the Congress will not allow this sort of a thing warming up between US and Russia to happen. Mr. Trump tried desperately, but the Congress would not let him. And so, I don't foresee that this is going to happen in the near this thing. But still, you mentioned, Yajur, about problems that India and the United States have between each other. Let me tell you also that there are problems between Russia and China, also huge problems, because China is trying to, gain entree and access to the Arctic. And that is something that is very, very sensitive for Russia. So Russia has invited India to partner it as far as the Arctic is concerned. China is trying to project itself, whatever is the term it uses, as a near neighbor of the Arctic and so on and so forth. There is no concept of that nature. You'd recall in 2019 when Prime Minister Modi went as the chief guest at the Eastern Economic Forum in Vladivostok. There was talk of mobility of workers from India going there, because they are mortally afraid of Chinese coming there and occupying that region. You would have seen very recently, there was a Twitter post that was made by the Russian embassy in Beijing about celebration of 160 years of Vladivostok as a Russian territory. And there was such a furor in China that is our territory. So, this expansionism of China is well known to Russia. So that is why Russia also wants to hedge its bets as far as this is concerned. Now, the last question that you raised, whether, United States and China might make up, I don't think it is going to happen. It might have been possible in the Obama era. It is not going to happen now, because right now it is China poses a systemic challenge to America, and it poses a challenge to the domination, influence, and hegemony of the United States as far as the world is concerned. So I don't think there is any way. There might be on certain peripheral matters that there might be agreement. They might have to work on climate change. They might have to work on nuclear non-proliferation, on arms control treaties, etc. But on a broader picture, whether it is because what China has positioned itself as an opponent to the rule of law and the international order, which is being created since the Second World War, and particularly as far as the democratic systems are concerned. So I think there is, of course, in international relations, you can never say never, but I don't think under the present circumstances, I don't see any possibility of that happening.
Okay, I'll bring in Emily for a quick one, and then Brigadier Pradeep Sharma. But before that, since we're talking about US and Russia, I would like to start a poll. And basically, everybody can see this now. Can India trust the US? And can India trust Russia? I just want to get like a general view of people who are watching this. What is the perception these days? So launch poll. I think you can see it now. Okay, Emily, on to you.
Yeah. Okay, very quickly. I think to the ambassador's point, I completely agree about U.S.-Russia relations. I think that they have become. It's gotten to the point where, in my opinion, it's not productive. Right? You can't if you are a policymaker who says, I don't think it's bad to have diplomats and to have dialogue with Russia, this is like no longer within the realm of an acceptable opinion. And I think that I personally think that that's damaging and limiting. So yes, I agree on the sort of tense nature of the of U.S.-Russia relations. And I think that the ambassador is also right about China. I think in all likelihood, this is going to, once this, it gets momentum, right? This new Cold War picks up steam, and then it's hard, particularly for the United States and for policymakers here, to break out of it. That's point one. Point two is, to the general's point, I agree that I think India has a strong case to make by saying, look, you guys pushed Russia to China. Unless you completely want Russia to go to China, which you shouldn't, let us keep talking to them. Let us keep working with them. Crimea happened, whatever. That's the reality is Russia is now tight with China. Unless you want that to kind of break off, it's not productive to have nobody in the world engage with Russia. And the third thing is, to your point, actually, that Russia is the junior partner to China. India doesn't want to be the junior partner to the US. I think that's part of the reason that the India-Russia relationship is going to endure, right? Neither one of these countries wants to play second fiddle to this respectfully, to the stronger, on the classic foreign policy sense, to the stronger power. And so it's one of the reasons that the relationship with one another will continue. And that I don't think that either India or Russia looks at the other now, maybe in the past, but now I don't think either one looks at the other as the junior partner, right? I think it's actually a partnership, which is a rare and valuable thing in foreign policy.
Thanks, Emily. Brigadier Sharma, you wanted to?
Yeah, just a few quick ones. Go back to 1949, where Mao Zedong told the Chinese that there was no middle path. They had to either go lean towards imperialism or socialism, one or the other. And he says there's no third option. And that's how they sort of adopted, the communist, social communist pattern. Thereafter, through the 70s, actually Russia confronted China with an arms buildup and other such posturing. And ultimately, both China and Russia settled their boundary disputes and they started cooperation. In fact, it was a very successfully organized realignment. Thereafter, the Chinese jettisoned Russia and aligned with the US. And today, they are now on a path of confrontation with the US and back to aligning with Russia. And behind the curtain in Russia, there are whispers that the Chinese may tomorrow pose a challenge to Russia itself. So there's a web between the web and a lot of imponderables in the present situation. Second, we don't know how the vacuum created by the US forces withdrawal from Afghanistan is going to shape up in the near future. Third, the growing tension in South China Sea and the string of islands and the first line and the second line which the US has put up and a countermeasure by Chinese deploying their weaponry to target the first and the second line. And therefore, how useful can India make itself, both to the US and to the Russians? And can India meet the requirements and demands placed on it by either side, maybe in Afghanistan, maybe in the ocean region, maybe in the economy? And what does India gain to benefit? Will it manage to resolve the escalated tensions on the border? Are our armed forces, or is the Indian military strength going to be built up? We are now in a make in India mode. How long is it going to take us for transfer of technology? There are imponderables, one after the other. So I personally feel it's too early for us to really lay down a firm line and a commitment that this is which way India is going to go. That's very clear to me. And going by past precedents set by the Chinese, where they changed their partners for the betterment of the country, well, I guess India can also choose that option. So till the time you have both partners, Emily, notwithstanding that you are listening in, India would do well to exploit the situation and graduate as fast as possible towards self-sufficiency. No self-respected nation is going to go with a hat in their hands and say, look, big brother, I need your help. So I would rest my case there. We have these challenges and we have to grow and we have to rise to the occasion. And it just doesn't rest only on the government. The government can make policies, but it's the people who have to deliver. Thank you.
So challenges can be turned into opportunities, but thank you for bringing up Afghanistan. I wanted to touch base on that. So with the US exit, India has been kept pretty much out of all discussions around how the place is going to shape up in a post-US future. For whatever reasons, presumably on the behest of Pakistan and China. I wanted to get your take on whoever wants to talk on this one. What is, should India be participating in the peace and safekeeping in the Afghanistan region in a post-US world? Or should we just stay completely out, as some analysts believe? I don't know who wants to take that question. Yes, sir, please. So yes.
Yeah, let me not start with the oft repeated cliche. What India wants is an Afghan-controlled, Afghan-owned, and Afghan-centered peace and reconciliation process. But I think Afghanistan is very important for India. So, we just cannot call it quits. We have to be there. And not only for the $3 billion plus of aid that we have given in terms of assistance and support, whether it is the Afghanistan-India Friendship Dam that got completed very recently, I think 2016, the Parliament building, the Pule-Khumri transmission line, the Zaran-Jelaram road, or any of the other, in all the 34 districts, we have high impact community development projects there. So our stakes in terms of development are huge. Even bigger stakes are in terms of India's security. We've seen what happened to IC-814 in 1999 and what is the sort of impact it had. So having a peaceful, sovereign, democratic, stable, secure Afghanistan is definitely in India's interest and in the other interests of the other countries. Now, India will engage. India is engaging with the Kabul government. We have excellent relations with the Ghani government and before that the Karzai government. And also, I think the latest move by Mr. Blinken when he had said, he said India will also be at the high table, at the negotiating table. And I'm sure India is reaching out, meaning I don't have any confirmed information or evidence to that effect, but I'm sure that India is reaching out to all stakeholders in Afghanistan to ensure that there is peace and security, then that our own interests are also protected.
Thank you. So you wanted to make a point, Emily, on this one? No, sorry, maybe I'm...
no, sorry, just holding my head. No, I would not think to tell India what it should do in Afghanistan. So I'll.
Okay, perfect. So changing gears, I wanted to also bring up another important aspect here, which is Kashmir. So it's obviously a very important issue for India, and Russia has been a key supporter of India on all international forums with regards to Kashmir. Moscow has exercised its veto. We all know this. They've exercised the veto 5 times. More recently in 2019, when India had revoked Article 370 in Kashmir, and China wanted to take that issue to the United Nations Security Council. Again, Russia used its weight to not get that, so that it was not brought into the UN Security Council agenda. So my question is, like, as Russia is now becoming a little more balanced, because it also has to balance its obligations to China and Pakistan, and we are orienting ourselves more and more to US, not just militarily, but in other aspects as well. As you mentioned, we are becoming strategic partners. Can we expect the same level of support from the US? So what if, like, the Russia stops using its weight to support India when these kind of issues come up? On the other hand, we have a United States with the Joe Biden administration, which does not look positively at India's human rights record. It does not look, especially in context of Kashmir. So is India risking a change at the international forums where so far we've retained that Kashmir is an internal matter? Do you think that sort of changes if Russia takes a back seat and US starts to take a harsh stance against India on that? Sorry.
Yeah,
Yes, sir. So, Jennifer Vandal.
yeah, Joe, as far as Kashmir goes, today the situation has changed. Earlier, we were totally dependent on the Soviet Union to bail us out in the Security Council. Today, while India is itself trying to get up there, the situation has changed. Even if, hypothetically, the Americans are not too happy with our human rights record, we have the British, we have the French. I mean, we are not alone today in today's world. We are not solely, we were at one point of time solely dependent. That has totally changed, and we don't have to get worried. Jammu and Kashmir is ours. It is for us to do what we deem fit. Period.
Thank you. Anybody else? Yes, sir. Please go ahead.
Yeah.
Okay. So, Brigadier Sharma, you have yes, please go ahead, sir. So,
yeah. Now, once again, I think as far as Jammu and Kashmir is concerned, there may be some ripples internally, but it's a done and dusted deal. And whether the US, look, soft points in the buildup of any country will be probed by others when they find that there is something which is not going in their interest. For example, in China, people will raise Tibet, they will raise Taiwan, they will raise Hong Kong. So we have this soft point of Kashmir, which one country or the other in a disagreement may sort of poke into to try and cause some ripples. But I think we are now firm enough to take those ripples in our stride and carry on with whatever we are doing. It's not going to be troublesome to us at all.
we don't poke China on Taiwan.
We need to.
Hong Kong, Tibet, Xinjiang, but that's a matter for a different debate. But that's also something I think a very important topic to be discussed. When we get poked in Kashmir, why don't we poke them on all these matters, especially Xinjiang now? With Ambassador Sajjanar, please go ahead.
Yes, very quickly on this. Basically, China took this matter in August to the UN Security, August 2019 in UN Security Council because of the abrogation of Article 370 and the change of the status in Jammu and Kashmir to 2 union territories and not a state. Now, I agree with what General Kharbanda said. Exactly, all these countries, UK, US, France came to the aid and said, that this is an issue that does not need to be discussed in a formal manner. There was not even a chairman's statement that came out. Second point that I would like to make is that all these countries again came to India's aid when China was putting this technical veto on Masood Azhar, since we are discussing Kashmir. On Masood Azhar from 2009 onwards, China had been putting this technical veto that we need more evidence, that we need more explanations as to why this should be done. And China was called out that either you come out with the reasons or we will take this from the 1267 committee to the UN Security Council to the full, and we'll ask you to explain the reasons. And that is when China sort of, gave up its veto. So I think there is, on terms of the substantive issues, India has huge amount of support. Now, on these issues, whether it is human rights or here or there are a number of issues which we have with the United States, which US might have with us and with other countries. I don't think they really, in any significant sense, change or dilute the strength and the dynamism of our relationship. Yes,
thank you, sir. So, Dr. Upadhyay, I'd like to also bring your view on this matter.
Yes, I entirely agree with what these two speakers said, General Kharbanda and the Master has said, that we really have support on Kashmir, and not only that, on every other issue. And I think the common threat here is China. And therefore, if you look at how the Quad is evolving in the post-COVID world, I think countries have now realized that there's a need to kind of diversify supply chains away from China. There's a need to engage with other countries. We see foreign direct investment coming into India. All of this is because India needs to be propped up as an alternate to China. And therefore, in a post-COVID world, I don't think we will find more and more support. And many of the issues, I think Kashmir and all are now could be regarded as very minor issues, which really will not come up for global debate in any case. So I think I completely agree with what the Master and General Kharbanda said on this.
Okay, and Emily, I think do you also agree with that, or you think there could be? Because I know in the Biden administration, there are people who have very strong views on this.
I think generally speaking, you are correct to observe that human rights or democracy become more of a sticking point with between India and the United States than between India and Russia. Ambassador Sen, who I think was going to be on this panel, but I interviewed him back in Delhi, and he said, people always think that there was an ideological closeness between India and the Soviet Union. Actually, the ideological closeness was between India and the United States, and that added pressure, right? And actually, the fact that the Soviet Union and India were these different systems, and they both respected that and kind of went on their way, that helped. I kind of do think that we have a similar dynamic today. And now I think so far in the Biden administration, we have not seen much made of this, to be honest. I think the focus has really been on China and the strategic partnership. And he spoke earlier on about a summit of democracies, which again, I think on the one hand, it broadens out the partnership, and on the other hand, it adds this layer of pressure and interrogation, right? And what about rights in your countries? What about rights in our country? And so it's on the one hand, it could serve to make the partnership more robust, right? Like the two great democracies and et cetera, but it does add, as someone said, it's a potential soft spot for the relationship. I'm not saying that it will undo the whole thing, but I do think that it's a challenge that India and the United States will have, that India and Russia just, for a variety of reasons, don't have.
And to your point, I wanted to bring up the whole vaccine debacle issue, where India's request for vaccine raw material ban to be lifted or waived for India was not taken. But it seems to me that it had very little impact on the impression Indians have of the US. So when I look at the poll results, it seems like 60% of people think we can trust the US, which is slightly higher than what people think of Russia. 50% people think we can trust Russia. So clearly, it seems like the US is still favored by most people. But to wrap up, if I had to summarize, it seems like most of us here believe that Russia-India relations may have evolved, but they're still pretty strong, not going to get impacted by these little things here and there. And it is not only in the interest of India and Russia to remain friends and allies, but also in the interest of United States, which is unlikely to sort of cause the fissures. Thank you all. It was very insightful conversation, very insightful session for me, definitely, and hopefully for everyone who attended. Thanks a lot for joining. Just wanted to share with you, so for the next debate on the next week on Sunday, we'll be hosting a debate on the topic, which we had organized a while ago, but we sort of postponed it given the situation, is whether India is obsessed with Pakistan. Context being that a lot of people globally think that India's political rhetoric, defense strategy, as well as foreign policy, seem to be overly dominated by Pakistan, a country clearly much smaller in terms of economy and military. So that is a puzzle, and then sort of people asked, why is India obsessed with Pakistan? So we wanted to address that. And we have a very interesting lineup of speakers. So I just, before we wrap up today, I just wanted to get your quick 1-minute take on that, each of you. So we'll start with you, General Kharwenda, please.
What you're saying is right, but that's history. Having fought 3 wars with them, they were the perpetual thorn in the side. And today, they are, we should be treating them with the disdain they deserve. I mean, it is futile wasting time talking about Pakistan, and we know where the actual problem is. We have to look east or northeast. China is the guy we have to be worried about. Pakistan is a nuisance. It's a thorn in our side, period.
Thank you, sir. We'll move on to who's next.
Yeah, okay.
Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, Yajur, actually, we've been blindsided for some, sorry. Am I on or?
Yeah, you're on. We are listening to you. Yes.
Yeah, we've been blindsided by being too passive towards the Chinese side, and they've outplayed us, outsmarted us, because they have a treaty of peace and tranquility along the borders with us, but they are using Pakistan to keep us engaged that side. Okay, and we're not addressing the Chinese, but we keep yelling and screaming at the Pakistanis. So I entirely agree with the general. It's time even our politicians, stopped even responding to the Pakistani sort of tribe, the other side, and so does the media. And we must focus to the main threat, which is to the north and the east. If we can silence and contain China, Pakistan is going to fall in place on its own.
Focus on the cause, not on the symptom. Thank you, sir.
Just a small point, Yajur.
Yes.
Basically, it is our ignorance of China and what is happening across the Himalayan wall. We are all very comfortable talking about Pakistan. Whether it's our intelligence agencies or what have you, because I have been in this game for over 20 years. I've seen we have to get our things right across towards China. Pakistan is very convenient to talk about. One feels more comfortable talking about Pakistan than China.
Yeah, we also have historical legacy, a lot of cultural and historical reasons there. Yes, sir. Dr. Ambassador Sajjanhar, please go ahead.
Okay, I don't think it's been only India that has been blindsided by China, because we have had these agreements from 1993, 96, 2005, 12, 13. And we thought, like any responsible international stakeholder, China would stick to those agreements. And till now, it had done so, except for some incursions in 2013 and Depsang 2014. And then, of course, in 2017, we had Doklam. I think it was the whole world that had been blindsided by this. What the professor mentioned, meaning starting from the Olympics in 2008. And then we had 2009, the 9-dash line that was drawn by Hu Jintao at that time. And after that, 2012-13, when Xi Jinping has come, CPEC started in 2015 and BRI in 2013. So I think the whole world, including Mr. Obama, he was taken in when Xi Jinping told him in 2015 that we are not going to militarize the South China Sea. So everyone was taken in. But I think what the Chinese also seem to have got a jolt, because they seem to have miscalculated very wrongly, a huge miscalculation. Because when they thought that in Doklam they will have a easy ride over this, they were quite taken aback. They never expected India to come in. And I think even last year in May, exactly a year from now, when they started the first skirmish on the north bank of Pangong Lake on 5th of May, I don't think they ever expected that India would be able to come up with this sort of deployment, 50,000 troops, mirror deployment of tanks and aircrafts and everything. They thought that what they had been used to, that is through flexing their muscles, through information, psychological warfare, you say how powerful we are, and the other side will sort of come on its knees, as it had happened in South China Sea, with Vietnam, with Philippines and the others. They thought the same thing would happen to India, but it didn't happen. So I think it is not only India, but now the message has gone very clearly to China and to the world that India is not going to succumb to such pressures by China. Maybe you need to have a separate session on China or India-China relations, because it is too big a subject to be taken. But the big point I want to make is that India now recognizes that China is, earlier it was a competitor, now it is an adversary. India realizes it's an adversary, and it will sort of focus all its attention, whether it is economic might, military might, or even its international alliances like the Quad. That might will go basically to ensure that we are able to maintain our sovereignty and territorial integrity against China.
Thank you. Dr. Upadhyay.
Yes. So on your comment on whether India, the strategic thinking in India has been dominated by Pakistan, that was true maybe until a decade ago, but that has changed now, and the focus is entirely on China. But I think the going forward, we need to realize that the real threat is going to be a Sino-Pak nexus, and we see developments of the Chinese naval base in Gwadar, economic connectivity and physical connectivity through the BRI. Once all of that is in place, and then the Sino-Pak nexus is what is going to become the real threat. So it's too early to say that we should take our eyes off Pakistan at this stage and simply look at China, which is not correct. We should actually be looking at both, and that is which is something which is a real threat, and that is why we really need the Quad to take care of a challenge like that.
Thanks, sir. I mean, you want to add on that one? How the perception is from Washington, D.C.?
I am definitely not going to opine on whether India is obsessed with Pakistan. I think that is not the role I want to play today. But
how it looks when you look at it.
Yeah. What I will say, it's funny. I was once at a talk, and I believe it was the foreign minister of Pakistan said, he was like, you guys are such good friends with the Indians now, but don't forget who your original friends were. We were originally the power that was close to the US, which to me is interesting, right? Because it's another reminder of the ways in which historical relations hold or don't. The only other thing I would say on this is that I completely agree with the ambassador that, if you go back and read transcripts from Obama's early conversations with Xi, they do not, you would not be able to guess from that we would be where we are today with China. And I guess to me, that's a reminder that although we have all forecasted today, we don't really know what the next 10 years with China, or indeed with any country, will be either. And I'll leave it there.
Thank you all of you. This was a huge honor to have all of you, and it was very enlightening for me. So for all the attendees here, next week we will be having a debate on this topic: is India obsessed with Pakistan? And among the panelists, we will be having G. Parthasarathi, who's the former spokesperson of Ministry of External Affairs, and as well as the ambassador to Myanmar. We will have Major General Bakshi, who's our retired Army chief and the veteran of Indo-Pak War of 1971 and Kargil War. And we will have Dr. Shriram Chaulia, who's the professor and dean of Jindal School of International Affairs, author and social scientist. Michael Kugelman, who's the director of Asia Program, South Asia, at the Wilson Institute in Washington, D.C., and Tariq Fateh, who's a very well-known Pakistani-Canadian journalist and author. We hope all of you can join us for that debate. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Yajur.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Emily.
Thank you so
Thank you,
Lovely.